podcast. Alex Bregman is a Red Sox. Where do the Cubs go, if anywhere, from here? Jed spoke about the budget, ownership, the rest of the roster. We will talk about all of that and more as we get ready for spring training on the CHGO Cubs podcast. This is the CHGO Cubs podcast. My name is Corey. I am joined, as always, by Brendan. We are coming to you on Friday. It's February 14th. No one I'd rather be with on Valentine's Day, Brendan.
Look at us. Look at us. You know, it's good to see you, Corey. It's a very romantic episode we have going on over here.
Yeah, sure. If that's how we want to phrase it. So, a lot to talk about on this episode. Sometimes in these spring training episodes, it's just kind of looking at video and, hey, this guy looked good, or, we saw an interesting interview the other day with Matthew Boyd. Kyle Tucker was there in Cubs camp on Thursday, I think, for the first time, and, Cubs gear doing baseball stuff. But we've got a bunch of other stuff to talk about first. I want to talk about the Alex Bregman saga that is over. He is not a Chicago Cub. Where the Cubs go from there, if anywhere, the Matt Shaw of it all. I want to talk about a little bit about Jed's comments and the payroll stuff. Cody and Luke did an episode on Thursday where they really went through Jed's comments and really kind of reacted to it, as the rest of the internet did, all together. So I would direct you there for, if you want, a longer discussion on that. And then I want to talk about, again, Jed said one of his comments was, we feel like this is pretty close to the group that we're going to have, maybe some minor moves, but the major stuff probably isn't going to be there, et cetera, et cetera. Talking about this team. If these are the 2025 Cubs, we're going to continue our conversation on those players and not, a bunch of hypotheticals and stuff like that. But since we spend so much time talking about Alex Bregman, and then, Jed really openly talking financials on Thursday, kind of more openly than we've heard him, I think, really ever. I do want to touch on that a little bit so that you and I can offer our thoughts. So first, I'll throw it to you, Brendan. I think you and I were both into the Bregman thing on the right deal and, with the right parameters. With the way the Red Sox went about that, 3/120, but a good amount of money deferred. So AAV per year more in the 30 range. Cubs, depending on who you listen to, supposedly in the 115, 120 range. How'd you feel when that news broke? How'd you feel about it all?
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising they got outbid. That was always my assumption. I didn't realize the Red Sox would be the team doing this, but what happened was he went to the highest bidder. Yes, it's 3 years, 120. The present day value makes it $30 million per year. The Cubs offered 4 years, 115 for an annual rate of just over $28 million. Alex Bregman goes to the Red Sox. He gets an opt-out after each year. He'll be making present day value $30 million. Gets to play at a historical ballpark like Wrigley, but in Boston, on a team with a similar competitive window and a similar budget. So the Cubs lost out on $2 million per year. And the rationale for why they missed is it did not fit their budget. And it did not push Jed over the top, despite him asking for ownership to give out that deal and push their budget.
Yeah, so I think a lot of interesting stuff comes out of what Jed said on Thursday. The usual caveat that he's going to give to the media what he wants to get. Now, as a,
he's been more open lately.
Say again?
He's been more open lately.
Yeah,
talking about his own
he doesn't have a contract about this.
Yeah.
So, maybe he is trying to offer some thoughts on maybe he feels hamstrung. Maybe he's saying what he wants to get the agents to think their money situation is a certain way. You never know.
You think he's justifying this behavior for his next employer? I'm not going to be too pessimistic over here.
I mean, at a certain point, what reason do you have to continuously hide the 8 ball, right?
Yeah,
at some point, just say what's going on. But that's a different discussion. But I think one of the more interesting things that came out on Thursday was the aggressiveness for Bregman and the money that they were ready to commit. Whatever source you believe on that, somewhere in the range near $30 million that they were willing to go, or maybe slightly less, right? The key was Jed was making it seem as though that was for Alex Bregman and Alex Bregman only. Maybe other players earlier in the offseason, but at this point, it is not a situation where they have $30 million earmarked to spend before they break camp and head to Tokyo. It was $30 million that would have been pushing whatever their budget is for Alex Bregman, and they got the green light for that. So my initial thought on that, here's what I'm going to say blanketly, because I don't want to relitigate our thoughts on ownership and payroll and all of these things. So I tweeted this, and this is how I feel about it. You guys, if you've been listening to us for any period of time, you know how we feel about all of this. I feel a couple things, three things. One, with the way the franchise is valued, how much it's ballooned since they bought it, the real estate, all these investments, the ticket price, everything. The Ricketts should be spending more. They should be more aggressive. They should have been more aggressive years ago, etc. They should always be in the top 5 or so in payroll with the organization that they are. 2, if they are so hamstrung, and it's not just Tom being cheap, but they're hamstrung because they don't have the liquidity or there's debt or all these other things, then I think it's time the media, everybody, start directing some of this at Crane Kennedy. If your business isn't cash flow positive or you need to break even and it's not just like billionaire greed at the top, why aren't we talking about how poorly the business is run then? If the money's not there, it seems like there'd be a lot of people that could succeed with the brand of the Chicago Cubs. And if every offseason we're having these conversations, maybe we direct some of the attention away from Tom and to the person who's making these deals, who's signing the RSN deal 10 years after that was an applicable thing for teams to be doing. My third thought is, even if all of that is true, to whatever degree, Jed Hoyer right now, at present, I believe has spent on his payroll $90 million more than the Milwaukee Brewers. Something in that range, depending on arbitration and all those other things. He has to be able to beat them given that gap. Those are the things I feel. I don't want to relitigate it all bit by bit. Those are my general thoughts. And overall, every time a move like this gets made, Brendan, it turns into a dumpster fire of ownership and money and this and that. And I'm just like, those are my thoughts. They're always going to be my thoughts. There you go.
We've been doing this
so long.
5 years. Actually, date back to the Harper era for almost 7 years. Yeah. Of course, the ownership should spend more money. To your point, if you're not cash flow positive where you are prohibited from giving out deferrals, it's justifiable to just ask why. How come that's happening? And if there's business operations to be optimized, of course, media, fans should question if that's possible. I don't frankly care anymore. I'm sick of talking about a business operations. I care about just watching baseball.
Yeah.
Okay? I want to watch games on TV, listen to Pat Hughes, watch practice, watch games on the backfields. The likelihood is the Cubs get sold again in our lifetimes. The average lifespan for an owner is 10 to 15 years. I don't care, dude. In 15 years, maybe they will sell the team. They want to be generational owners. You have no idea.
Yeah.
Are we frustrated? Yes, but at some point, I want to get back to talking about baseball.
Yeah. Well, that was really why I, ended up tweeting what I did on Thursday and just expressing that sentiment, because I was watching video of Kyle Tucker, and I was like, I have literally spent half the day reading about the luxury tax.
I mean, that's a great point.
These things, and I'm like, you know what? stop. I care about it deeply. You guys know, like, I'm a season ticket holder. Of course it pisses me off if they're not, if I'm paying a premium price and they're giving me a less than premium product, right? And breaking even and all biblical losses while they raise our prices and stuff like that. And it's my choice, right? Like, I know what I'm doing. But at the same time, of course I care. I care deeply. But I was like, man, like, you're looking at Kyle Tucker, top 5 player in the league, or top 10, whatever you want to, And I'm like sitting here thinking about how close they are to the luxury tax. It was a pullback moment where I was like, all right, hold on. Like, let's focus on the baseball. Let's try to enjoy this. Of course I care. I'm in a part of the conversation, but
it's a balance. It's a balance. You can be upset because it does matter. Ownership, the payroll, of course it matters. And then you can also balance yourself like, all right, what are we missing here? Because you're right. I saw Kyle Tucker put on Cubs uniform for the first time today, or Cubs apparel for the first time today.
He looks good in it.
He looks good in it. But you're right. It was not even in my mind. I was not even thinking about that. I saw Nico Horner taking ground balls. He shaved his head, by the way. Goodbye, long hair. The long hair with him and Swanson no longer there. We're talking about money and deferrals and modern day value. I got my own tax problems to deal with over here. Okay? I don't need to be doing this during my hobby time,
But so, in addition to that, I will say on that note, given that they are imposing this budget and operating the way they are, I appreciated at least that the green light was given. Jed was like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
This is
if you want to be optimistic about
this is what I want to do. And they said yes. Now, I don't have a problem with them not going to that level. I think I was pretty loudly banging the drum for Bregman. I liked the idea a lot. I liked the way it lifted this floor. But I think that level of commitment, I just don't think he's that guy. 31-year-old, trending downward, really good player. Again, like, I really wanted him. I was very disappointed that they didn't. But if $30 million with all the deferrals and stuff like that would have created problems for them. No question. And that's not, even considering the potential that, how he ages and if he doesn't opt out and things like that. And I just don't think he's that player worth creating this payroll and roster situation for. Once it gets to the level, even with the deferrals, I understand it, but $40 million a year, it's like, no, that's not the player for that. We've talked about a lot of players over the last few off seasons that I believe would represent, and Kyle Tucker will be one of them. Like, back up the truck, whatever it does to your payroll, etc., do it. It's the right thing to do. I think there was a point on Bregman, and the Cubs made a really solid offer. I don't like being the participation trophy winner, as the Cubs have been several times this offseason, but if they're operating in the real world and this is their budget, this is how they're going to do their finances, we have to as well, and that means that there's a limit on what is a good idea or not. And I think this at that level, to beat Boston, not just match them, but to beat them, to get them to come here, not a good idea.
You saw, though, if they are competitive, the range that they can spend too. So if they're in June, July, and they're looking like true cut division contenders, they have maybe 25, 30 million to work with. So that is one encouraging aspect. Yes, they missed out on. Yeah, hold on.
So, go ahead.
Yes, they missed out on
them. It'll be a long episode.
I know. Yes, they missed out on them, and maybe this decreases their chances of getting to a position where they will then spend that money in June and July. But if you want to look at this through rosy glasses, if that's even the term, I don't even know. But if you do want to be optimistic, that is a little bit of a window into their thinking process. Should they be competitive, which Fangraphs does not think they are, but Pecone thinks they're a 90-win team, maybe they will go out and make those big splashy moves. And not just one, but perhaps two, because they have that flexibility now.
Yeah, and look, like I said, I feel pretty good about where the roster is. I think overall,
define pretty good. Give me in your mind, like, where you put the Cubs win-wise right now.
think like mid-high 80s, if enough goes right.
So let's rewind the tape. Let's say you're looking at your future self last October to right now, and you say, "Yeah, I feel pretty good with the mid-80s team."
Well,
you probably slap yourself in the face.
That's sort of why I say pretty good. I mean, I feel like looking at the NL Central and the way things have gone, I think they have the group, and I'm excited about their young guys. Overall, like, is the offseason where I wanted it? At this present moment, no. The Kyle Tucker trade is a huge swing, great swing by Jed Hoyer, an amazing move. But as you and I talked about it before, at this point, they haven't even really fully allocated the money they got back from Cody Bellinger. And we talked before, even prior to the Bregman decision and stuff like that, like, I think there's a real argument to be made, like how they allocated this money. They signed some old, like, oft-injured guys to fill some of these positions. At present, and we'll talk about this later in the show, you don't have any cushion for Matt Shaw at third base. And if he doesn't succeed or gets hurt, or you want to manage his playing time on a more careful, you have basically no good cushion.
And we'll talk about that cushion.
You didn't add a top of the rotation guy, and I do want to talk about a piece that came on Bleacher Nation as well from our friend Michael Ceramic, because I think it kind of illustrates these things. We're gonna have our first ad break here, but plenty more to talk about, and we're not done kind of on the Bregman Jet stuff. So when we come back in a second, we'll keep talking about that. Plenty to talk about here today. So let's hit our first ad break, and we will be back in a second.
Okay, cornbread hemp CBD. Looking for a healthier way to relieve aches and pains while getting a better night's sleep? Try Cornbread Hemp's USDA organic CBD gummies. Cornbread offers the first USDA organic CBD gummy in the USA. Their CBD gummies are the highest quality full spectrum gummies on the market. If you want to give cornbread a try, they're offering CHGO listeners 30% off their first order. Just visit cornbreadhemp.com/CHGO and use promo code CHGO at checkout. That's cornbreadhemp.com/CHGO and use code CHGO for 30% off your first order. This is the good life.
All right, Brendan. Let's keep talking. Let's finish our thoughts there, and we can kind of move on. I think the one thing, as you were talking, yes, I want them to have money to use in season. I want them to be exploring at the trade deadline how to get better, et cetera, et cetera. But as you pointed out, the easiest response to that is like, well, if you find yourself in July not in a position to make those trades because you've performed poorly or not well enough to justify it, then isn't it going to be very easy to say, gee, wish they had spent that money to make the team better and come out of the gate and put themselves in that
They'll
position?
be judged on that.
Double-edged sword.
Yeah. They'll be judged on that.
Yeah.
The one other takeaway, too, before you go on here, which I can't wrap my head around, currently, if you look at MLB Cots, they're projected for $210 million right now. So 2023, they finished a year with $230 million. Last year was $240. So I'm trying to wrap my head around the statements we heard today and the reports we heard that they're currently at budget now.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to understand is, are they around 210 to 215 now? And the only reason they would go above that 210, 215 is if they are competitive, because that's the case, then it does represent the payroll slash.
And a lot of people warned and worried about.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is one where I'm trying to understand if that is the correct interpretation. Are they actually slashing payroll while simultaneously trading for Kyle Tucker in Jed Hoyer's final year?
Well, and that's what this conversation all stems from. Like, maybe it didn't lay out clearly, but like when I was giving my three feelings and talking about all that stuff, it has nothing to do with Alex Bregman. It has to do with the information that we learned on Thursday and how they're kind of operating. Like that's the issue. It's not missing on Bregman or not going 40 million or whatever on Bregman. It's that potentially their budget is $20 to $30 million less. Again,
which equates whose contract equates Cody Bellinger's contract. They just
so it's like, why is a team of this market and this size cutting payroll and setting a payroll that is lower than the previous 2 years? And 2 years ago, you'd argue, like, was certainly not as serious of an effort to win as this one should be. And you traded for Kyle Tucker and your presidents last year, et cetera. So that
was... you went over the luxury tax last year?
Right.
So
that's where that all stems from.
Right.
Like, they made a solid effort on Bregman. They made a good offer. I don't have a problem with them not meeting Boston at that. That's not what this all stems from. We're not talking about Tom or Crane Kenny or all this other stuff. It's like, because you're potentially slashing the budget, like, that's where that's stemming from. That's the issue. The other thing that does concern me from the commentary was the public statement, and things can change, right? All of these philosophies can change. The organizational philosophy can change. The money can change. Everything can change. The organizational avoidance of deferred money was a bit of a, like, should I be alarmed about that kind of comment? Now, I'm not a financial expert, I'm not a tax expert, any of this stuff. So if it's a sound decision or one they prefer for certain money reasons, whatever, right? That's not what I'm talking about. What concerns me about that preemptively is if that is where the league is going to go, and the CBA is maybe going to deal with all this, it might mess everything up. You never know. But if that's how these big players are getting signed, and that's what's going into the structure of these contracts that ultimately are getting pen to paper, getting the player to sign with your team, outwardly saying, like, as an organization, we just don't believe in that, it represents one of those, similar to when we talked about the reluctance to do these super long-term deals. And again, I understand the logic. I totally understand where they're coming from in those beliefs. But sometimes, as we've discussed, if that's where the market is, you have to meet the market. The choice is to do what is necessary to get the player or not get the player. You don't often get to have your cake and eat it too. They have been able to do that in certain deals. They get the player they want on a shorter deal, opt-outs, whatever. But if these players are signing deals because these teams are going with this extra money that's deferred, to say you're not going to do that, it's like, okay, well then when you're ponying up for Kyle Tucker, you better hope the Yankees don't defer $200 million and steal him from you. That's where the league is going, Brendan. On face value, it's like, okay, I mean, I would prefer that not be your philosophy.
We don't know the timeline of that squeeze. The TV deal hopefully is resolved by the end of the year. The new CBA, the ideas being exchanged will be clear at the end of the year. Is this going to be a long-term squeeze where they can't defer money now, next year, the following year, the year after that? Then, of course. But I'm not going to work myself up over deferrals when we don't know the timeline of that.
Just of the information we got, that was one of the things that jumped out to me, is like, okay, but like, if that's what it's taking to get these top guys, like,
well, it's for the player. I mean, of course, it's mutually beneficial for the player and the team. For the player, you get your $30 million annual average present day value, right? So the way to look at that is $30 million for Bregman versus $28.5 from the Cubs. So yeah, it's $40 million per year on paper, but it's really $30 million. You still beat the Cubs. From the Red Sox perspective, okay, you defer that money, you make more money over interest over time. You may not be as liquid in the shortcoming, so you defer that money, you get more cash, and pay that way. The Cubs did that with John Lester, your boy John Lester. Cubs did that with Jason Hayward. That was one way they were able to get those guys, defer the money in the long term, and they're still paying those contracts today. A little bit of those contracts today. The way, if I were to guess why they're not willing to do that now, it would be because projecting revenue right now, on February 14, 2025 for the Cubs, without certainty for their TV situation, is uncomfortable for them. So that's what,
I get it. Things can change. It all just comes to, I think, at a certain point, like, even speaking of getting into, the whatever of it, but it just, at some point it would be nice to not just constantly have all of these conversations about.
Of course, if they offered Bregman $31 million, he would have signed with the Cubs, dude. Like that's if it were 4 years, $130 million, he'd be in Mesa right now. Yeah. Deferral or no deferral?
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. So anyway, that's I think what we have to say about that. It's similar to stuff we've said in the past. I wish they spent to the moon. I wish they were number one. I wish they were always innovating on these contracts and stuff. And I wish Jed could beat the Brewers with an extra $75 to $100 million. I wish all of these things. As we go forward, especially as it relates to ownership, payroll, all these other things, like, to me, the proof is going to be in, if you're competitive at the deadline, you better spend that money, and you better do what you need to do to fix whatever holes show up and cement yourself as the team that's going to win the division, go to the playoffs, etc. And you better pony up for Kyle Tucker. Like, that's where the kind of like put your money where your mouth is kind of thing. Fine if, you're setting these budgets and the luxury tax and all this other stuff, but you traded for this big star, you've been talking about getting a big star, all this other stuff, you better do what it takes to keep it. Unless, if somebody goes insane, there's nothing you can do about that. But I don't want to hear, this same like Bregman style conversation when we're talking about Kyle Tucker next offseason.
I feel as if because they did offer that 28.5, Tucker was not closed off for those discussions in the future, which again, if you want to be optimistic about this, that is one reason to be optimistic. They could have had Bregman on the books, despite the opt-outs, but on the books with negotiating for a contract extension in September for Kyle Tucker.
Yeah.
And that was not a hindrance for Jed to even propose an offer to Bregman's camp.
Yeah, I mean, they got a green light for a big contract, and so hopefully that means that they will have.
There's more green lights in the future.
If it's Jed's contract to be offering, we'll see about that. All right, so now it goes to where do we go from here? And there was a really good piece over with our friends at Bleacher Nation. Michael Cerami, one of our longest running guests, even back when it was just Brendan and I, wrote a good piece titled "The Cubs are one piece short, and I think they kind of know it." And I thought it was just a really thought-provoking article. And the basic premise is the Cubs were on record, right, as making big offers that in some cases are out of their comfort zone, very clearly, on a top reliever, Tanner Scott, on a top position player in Alex Bregman, and multiple starting pitchers, Roki Sasaki, the trade for Jesus Luzardo that was, very heavily rumored. Some of these other rumors, you never know, like, what they were actually in on, et cetera, et cetera. There's clearly been a lot of smoke in these three areas. Now, Brendan, of all of those things, they did not get a top-level position player outside of Kyle Tucker. I'm saying they were still pursuing that after Kyle Tucker. They did not get a frontline starting pitcher, and they did not get an absolute, lockdown, top-of-the-class reliever. So I just thought it was very interesting. Like, they were aggressively pursuing these things. The Tanner Scott offer is not something we have seen from this front office in a long time. And in terms of, that level of money and years and commitment to a free agent reliever like that. And so it is interesting because now we find ourselves here, and they've made adjustments to all of those areas of the team, but not at that level. And so I just thought it was a very interesting kind of premise from Michael that they were trying to upgrade these areas in a significant way, and they did not. They upgraded all of them in smaller ways, but not in the way that they were pretty aggressively and ready to be on the books, to commit to.
Yeah, the hope is those opportunities present themselves in June and July. And the projections map out where the Cubs think they are, maybe where you and I think they are as well. Fangraphs has him as an 84 to 85 win team. Pagoda has him as a 90 to 91 win team. The truth probably is somewhere in the middle, and that truth is confounded by an error of about 14 wins. So they're in what I would describe as no man's land, where you have a coin flip at making the playoffs. Now, if you want to be a very optimistic person, well, great. We know coin flip's awesome. If you want to be very pessimistic, then you can say, okay, I wish we were only one or two players away from being a 100-win team. I wish we were not an injury away of our team being derailed. And the way for that to happen is you're a 94, 95-win team on paper. You're in the tier that we see the Braves and Dodgers. But that's not possible as well. The Cubs know where they're at. We know where they're at. The way they get to the point of our aspirations is guys like Shaw do well. Matthew Boyd yields dividends. Kyle Hendricks. I saw him in the Angels today. I know Floridians. I miss you, Kyle. Jordan Wicks, Ben Brown, the young folks, they produce value, and you're at a point come June, July, where you're getting value from pre-arbitration guys. That way you clean up where you can spend that money. And we're not spending money at $5 million, $10 million on Presley types per year, or looking at guys like Justin Turner or Markada and trying to shore up the back end of that, because frankly you don't really need it that much. Or going out and trading Morel for Paredes and shifting that over for Kyle Tucker, yada yada, because you already have Shaw and Bush producing at under $1 million per year. So we know where they're at. The aspirations are still realistically achievable. Just we hope that we can get there in June, July.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I am curious, I would like to see them still bring in someone that can play third base. I think I would have.
Love.
I think you're a shortstop.
I can play any position, man. I'll make that Zobrist.
Yeah, Joe Madden.
Yeah. I can't play the outfield though.
Right.
Or pitch.
Because of the above knee.
No, my glove's too small. Yeah.
I would feel not great. I'm totally fine with Matt Shaw, getting the runway to earn this job and have it be his job at third base, but I do not feel comfortable with the level of support they have at that position at this moment. John Birdie's fine, the guys they have, Workman, etc. Maybe they can fill in, play good defense, whatever it is, but if Shaw struggles, if Shaw gets hurt, if Craig Counsell in the front office, and Shaw's a hugely important player for this franchise, as you just laid out, kind of specifically why. If you're getting a feeling of you know what, we want to sit him against some of these pitchers or some of these matchups. He's really struggling with guys that, throw a certain kind of pitch, and we want, he's in a groove right now, we don't want to break him out of it. You want